Hi everyone. Okay, so before we get in, so this is going to be the lecture on marriage and family, but before we get into that, I just want to cover a couple things about since we're, coming up to the end of the semester. Let's see. Okay, so I have your syllabus. Okay, so there's only a few more things left that are due and only a few more, like days left in the semester. So I just want to kind of touch on those so we're clear. Instead of just posting a separate announcement, I figured I would just talk about it in this video. Okay, so you do have your paper due. So I'm recording this on the 24th. You probably aren't watching it until maybe the 25th or later. So I know I've already posted like multiple announcements about this, but this is just another reminder about the paper that it's due on the 25th. So that's Wednesday. So tomorrow. Well, for me, it's tomorrow. Now, so I went back and forth about when this was going to be due. Should I make it to at the very end of the semester? But I assumed, because this has been the case in the past, that most of you have like other kind of larger papers or projects due at the very end of the semester for other classes. So I don't want you to be bombarded with, you've got to do like 4 or 5 things that are all due like the same week. So I wanted mine to be done due a little earlier. I know that you're like, well, I don't want it. Makes it a little more difficult in the sense you have to do it earlier, but it also, I think, thinking more like the bigger picture, that hopefully it's a little more de-stressful in the fact that you're not having to do a bunch of other projects at the same time. And also I went back and forth about like exactly when should I do it, before the holiday, like Thanksgiving, or after. And I figured if I do it after, I think like there could be both ways of looking at it. Like one way, well, you get a little extra time because you get that long weekend, but in reality you're going to want to be spending time with your family or resting, relaxing. So I went with the case, obviously, of having it due before the holiday. That way you can enjoy the holiday, and then when we come up to those last like 2 weeks of the semester, then it's one less major thing you have to worry about, because I'm sure in other classes you'll be doing that. Let's see. So today's the 24th, and I've already received quite a few papers from people since maybe like the 21st, 22nd. I probably have about close to 10 papers already that have been turned in, so that's great. So it seems like you guys as a class are really on top of it. You're getting it turned in early, probably. I'm assuming because you want to, you're doing prep, like I'll be doing tomorrow, like prep for the holiday, and maybe you're traveling or something. So for the rest of you, obviously, I'm assuming you're going to be getting that in, and it doesn't seem, there were a few questions people had, just clarification on a few things, but in general, it didn't seem as if anyone was like confused about the assignment. So I did post those 2 videos talking about the ethnography, talking about like what I want you to take out of it, how I want you to do the paper, like the options you have for that. And like I said, I think as a class, like you guys understood it, it wasn't an issue. If by chance you are maybe the one student who is like, oh my gosh, I'm not even really sure what she's talking about, in modules you'll see there are 2 videos discussing like I think it's the first 3 chapters, and then the last 4 chapters are 2 separate videos, and they're labeled like class discussion on ethnography, chapters 1 through 3 or something like that. And I also go over what I want, like I also go over the requirements for the actual assignment. Okay, so if you were confused about any of that, there are those videos that I go into great detail about all of that. And also, like I said, I've posted multiple, like one, it's been in your syllabus since the first day of class, but I've talked about this multiple times throughout the semester, so no one should be confused about when it's due and what's required of you. Okay, so the other thing is that you do have that last annual edition assignment that's due on the 30th. And then, let's see, you guys already finished your class discussions. That's already been done. Okay, and then, so I did cut it a day short with giving you guys, so that on the day of December 2nd, so I put no class, study for the final. There's no real studying. It's going to be the same style that we did before, where it's going to be like an essay. I'm sorry, I like the phlegm. And what was I going to say? So basically it just gives you an extra day to work on whatever you want to work on another class, de-stress, whatever it is. It just gives you an extra day. I could have thrown in, I was going to do another lecture on, I do one usually after religion. I do one on like art and individual expression, but I figured at that point, what always ends up happening, it's like the very last day, students, whether we're in class or online, students aren't as engaged, and I'd rather not waste my time making a lecture that no one's really going to watch. I'd rather you just take the time to, work on something that's important. And also, like I have here, that it's the last day you can submit extra credit. So maybe instead of, working on another class, you still work on this class, but you work on maybe watching a documentary for extra credit. So that's totally fine. And then, of course, we have finals week. And I'll be posting, just like I did with the previous exams, I'll be posting the final, so many days before it's due. And it will be due on the 9th. So I will be posting it, let's see, if it's due on the 9th, I'll probably post it, sometime around like the 4th or something like that. As we get into December, I'll figure out the exact day and then post an announcement about that. Okay, so now that I've rambled for 6 minutes, I'm not sick anymore, but like you guys know what it's like when you're sick. You have like a whole week after being sick that you still have phlegm, and it's just like, it's just the whole thing. So that's been my morning, Okay, so I think I know I keep looking down, so I'm looking at your syllabus. So I think that's pretty much it. We're kind of wrapping it up. There's not much else to do. By the time you watch this video, you probably will have turned in your paper. You'll only have that one annual edition and then the final exam, and then you'll be done. So also as a reminder, so also, I've been grading stuff throughout the semester, and I post the grades. I post the grades in Canvas. I also have my own special like Excel spreadsheet that I keep, and I have everything written down because it's always, I want to have a backup of the backup, just because there's always the chance. This has happened once before, like a couple years ago. There's always the chance that as I'm entering your grades into Canvas, that I accidentally enter it incorrectly. So like, for example, if you got a 15 on one of the annual editions and I accidentally just typed the 1 and maybe I missed the 5, but I didn't realize, so it just says 1. You're like, wait a minute, I'm pretty sure I got perfect score on that. Why does it say 1 and not 15? Please bring that to my attention. So like I said, this happened one time. This was like a couple years ago. I went to type in 50 and I typed in 5 for this one student. They were like, I think that's wrong. So like usually what I do, as I'm going through them, I always double check. And then at the very end of the semester, before I submit any final grades for you, I very carefully go through each assignment and I double check based on what's on Canvas, what's on my Excel spreadsheet, what I've written down before I submit any official grade to CSN. Because usually something will stick out to me, like that person's turned in everything. Why did they have a 0 for this one thing, or why do they have a 2, or so I usually will catch it. But it's also your responsibility. These are your grades. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, you guys. It's also your responsibility to just double check this. So I would recommend, within the next, not like today, but probably as we get into December, to just skim your grades and make sure your scores look correct. Also, usually what I do is for entering grades for any assignment, because I let you guys turn stuff in late, I usually don't give you a 0 if it's like a day late. I wait usually to enter in 0s for maybe like 2 weeks post any assignment, just to see like maybe I've given you an extension, maybe you're going to turn it in late and get partial credit. So I usually don't post, a 0 until it's been quite a while since that assignment's been due. So if you have a blank, that's why. But also, like, if you do have any 0s and you are pretty sure that you turned something in, please let me know. If you have a blank and something, like maybe you're like, I turned that in last week, it's still showing blank, because usually, like you guys know, I get things graded fairly quickly. So the point of that was, I feel like I'm already like rambling so much on this video. The point of that was, double check your scores, make sure everything looks good. At the very end, once everything's graded and I've graded your final exam, I will very likely post something to the course shell, like, great semester, everyone, double check your grades. I'll be, because I think the last day of the semester is like, the 11th, and that's a Friday, and we are, I think, required to have official grades turned in by like that Tuesday, so like the 15th or something. So usually like on the 14th is when I'll turn them in, because I don't want to do them last minute. So usually I'll wait through that weekend to see if any of you have any questions, concerns about something, and then I submit the official grades. Because once I submit an official grade, and if there's a hiccup in some way, and it's like a whole paperwork process to fix it, and with everything that's going on now, like I'm not even, literally we got like, all the instructors got emails recently, like we are not allowed to be on campus. Like normally, even though campus has pretty much been closed, we're still allowed to go if we need to pick up something from our mailbox or pick up a form, pick up a new textbook, whatever it is, we're still allowed to kind of be there. But now they're like, you literally can't go. So if we had to do a paperwork process, trying to get a hold of like people via email, like it's the whole thing. So like I said, I always double check, and please double check. And I've never never been in a scenario as an instructor where there's been a crazy mix up with someone's grade and I've had to do this process. I just am aware of how the process works, and they warn us every semester, it's a thing, like double check your grades, blah blah blah. So I'm just letting you guys know if you notice anything. And a few of you have already let me know, like, hey, I turned that in a week ago, I didn't see a grade yet. And this has happened, like I'll put my grades in my Excel spreadsheet on my computer, and then I'll forget to put them in Canvas. I'm like, oh, thank you for reminding me, and I'll put them in Canvas so you guys can see them. So usually it's just that I have, like, by being organized, trying to have it in multiple locations, usually it's a benefit, but sometimes I'm like, one more extra step. But I think in the long run, it's worth it. Anyway, okay, 11 minutes into this. We haven't actually gotten into this, but okay, so now we're going to get into the actual assignment or lecture. So this is, if I have phlegm the whole freaking time, okay. Okay, marriage and family. So I have this listed on the syllabus as covering one day. This isn't a particularly super long PowerPoint, but it's not a short one either. I've said this multiple times. I'd like to keep these under 45 minutes, at least under an hour. This one might reach that. I mean, we'll see. I don't want to split it up into two, though. So we're just going to kind of skim through this. There might be one or two things I might skip over, but we'll see. Okay, so let's just get right into it and get into it. Okay, so slide number 2. So, this is looking at what is family. That's the whole point, like what is family? And we've kind of used this term throughout the semester. And if I said this term to you, you might have in your mind like a very specific, like based on your personal experience, like what is family? Family to you might mean like a traditional like nuclear family, like mother, father, a few siblings. But for many of you, I'm assuming it probably means something slightly different. And you can kind of see here in this picture, this is what I'm getting at. So like obviously mine's probably like not the norm. But my family, like you can see here, like that is me in that picture. Let's see, I have red hair. It's probably like 2016. So you could see me with the girls again. So Alice and Waffle, I think Alice is in the chair. Waffle's sleeping in the other room. She'll probably be out here later. But then I think I mentioned this to you guys in that first get to know me, lecture, that I have 2 rats, Maggie and Carol, and my hamster Tater Tot, who did pass away, but I kept her in the PowerPoint slide, but she did pass. So for me, as Alicia, when I think about what is my family, like my immediate household family, that because that's what it is. It's all my baby, like my fur babies, And for you, it might be maybe you're a single parent, so maybe it's like you and your child or your children. Maybe it's you don't have any children, you don't have any pets, and maybe it's just you and your partner, whether you're married or whether you're not married. So I think family, and I think most of us probably recognize this, that family is you choose your family. It's not always the people who you're actually blood related to, although that's clearly evolutionarily and culturally is very important. So thinking in those terms, though, when I think about like who I'm close to in my my blood related or my marriage related family, obviously my mother. So I think I mentioned this to you guys, like she was here a couple weeks ago. I hadn't seen her in over a year, which is only because of all this, everything going on with traveling, that we haven't had the opportunity. Usually it's not that the case. And up until I moved here in 2015, so before that we saw each other like all the time because we lived like 30 minutes from each other. But now like she lives across the country, and I moved to, so like but so like she and I have always been really close, and I'm really close with my grandmother, and I'm really close with my cousin, who we were kind of raised more like sisters, which probably is the case for many of you as well. You might have cousins you're really close to, and I'm an only child, so like for me that was like my sister experience. So her children, who are technically like my second cousins, or I like call them my nieces, her 3 daughters. So I feel like that's my family, whether it's this next generation or this generation or the generation before me, that I have certain people in my family to whom I'm very close. Even though, but also like I don't live near them, so I don't have anyone in my family, in my like blood related family, who lives in Nevada. I'm the only one, so that makes it a little more difficult. Oh, here comes Waffle. Can you see her in the video? You heard me talking about you? Come here. Come here, let's say hi. You wanna say hi? Come on. Oh, she's in a mood. Oh, who's there? Who's there? Are you sleepy? You cutie. they wanted their sweaters off, so we got their sweater. Do you hear her? She's like, oh, my life's so hard. I'm a dog. I'm a spoiled doggy. Oh no. Okay. Oh, you got the snotty? Oh, me too. Okay, baby. You're a star. This is why people actually watch the videos. They want to see you. They want to see you. You're going to have your own YouTube channel? Yeah, okay, I'm going to put you down. Okay. Good girl. Go lay down with your sister. Okay. Yeah, so family. So, okay, so getting into some of the other stuff I have here on the PowerPoint slide. When we hear things like family friendly, that's another way of saying what? If we were in class, people would be raising their hand. But if you see something like a movie or a restaurant that says family friendly, what does that mean? Think about it. You probably understand that it usually means like it's okay for children. And so like we have a lot of terminology in in our culture. Like when people ask you, are you going to start a family? They mean, are you going to have children? So we already have in our minds, like whether you agree with it or not, whether it's your experience or not, culturally we have this understanding and this kind of standard that you're not really a family until they're offspring. Now, evolutionarily, this kind of idea, you could say, okay, like that kind of makes sense, obviously. But in terms of like the cultural experience, and this is obviously going to differ from culture to culture, although this is probably something that's a little more universal. And obviously your individual experience might be different. You might totally agree with this. You might absolutely not. You might be somewhere in between. But this idea that you have to have children to be a family. And like I would say that's not accurate at all. In fact, your family, you and just your partner can be your family. Whether you want to have kids later in life or whether you don't. The family I have, like my family, whether I'm talking about like the family who live in another state, they're absolutely my family. But also if I'm talking about like my immediate family and I think of my babies, like it's me and my babies, and when this has happened a couple times where I've said something like, oh, the girls, I gotta get someone to watch the girls, or people think I have children. They think I have like 2 daughters, and I'm like, no, because then I'll say, oh, like Alice and Waffle. They're like, Waffle? Like I have dogs, and they're like, oh, you say the girls. I'm like, well, I mean, I like that. They're both female. I mean, well, actually, all of them are female, and so I say the girls, like, and anyone who knows me knows exactly who I'm talking about. But people have thought I had children, like that's the assumption. I say, no, I don't have human children, But I'm still on slide 2, and we're at 17 minutes. We're never gonna get through this. Okay, I might end up just kind of like skipping a few things, but I'll talk about the important things. There was something else I was gonna say about this. I forget. Okay. So let's move on to slide 3. Okay, slide 3. What is marriage? Obviously, you probably are very familiar with this. A series of customs formalizing a relationship. Typically, we understand it between, like 2 people. Now, I'll get too far ahead of myself on this. Okay. But like, obviously, we understand there's a lot, like, culturally, like, layers to what the meaning is, the symbolism in marriage, especially like in terms of like the ceremony of marriage, and cross-culturally, these are going to be, can be very elaborate, even within a culture. Like even if we talk about in like Western culture, or even like if we're talking about like just kind of like Vegas culture, like weddings, we could say, oh, we probably have a very specific like subculture of like weddings and marriage in Las Vegas. People might go down to the courthouse. People might have a very traditional ceremony like in a church. Some people might, go to the Strip or go to, Fremont Street or whatever and go to one of the little chapels and get married there. Maybe it's planned, maybe it's not. Like we probably have a really interesting variety of types of marriage and wedding ceremonies just in our city. So actually that would be like a really interesting research topic. Someone's probably doing it already. I'm sure someone at UNLV is writing like their master's thesis on it or something, but very interesting. So you guys are probably already aware that while we kind of have this standard of when we think of marriage, like you probably, like if I asked you, like imagine a wedding ceremony, even if this is not your personal experience or even maybe some of the weddings you've attended, we probably still have in our mind, for the most part, this standardized view of like, okay, it's probably a male and a female, they're probably in a church, there's probably a minister who's probably also a male, The woman is wearing a white wedding dress. There's a flower girl. Maybe it's very elaborate and ornate, which is the case for many people to varying degrees. But also, like I already kind of mentioned, we are aware that there are other like way different ways of understanding and experiencing that ceremony. So I think I have some examples of this. Okay, I want to get into some like the symbolism of this. So here we go. So slide 4, the marriage ceremony. So some questions. What is the symbolism involved in traditional Western? So even if we're talking about like our culture, because you may or may not be aware of like how other populations, like what is their cultural experience in terms of like marriage, what ages may or may not be appropriate, what colors are more traditional for their wedding ceremonies, what events might occur. So if we're only talking about the things you are probably familiar with, so like more Western, cultural experiences of this. So like, what are the objects involved? What are the colors? What are the types of events? So like, think about this. And in class, typically, this is where we'd have a really great discussion because so many people would have, comments and like personal experiences with this. But I'll just try to, kind of remember. And also as I'm talking, like obviously think of your own experience if you're married or if you've attended weddings. So I'll say, so like when one of my friends got married, it was a very small ceremony. There was probably like 15 of us all together attending. It was on a beach, and her dress was white, but it was, very simple, beautiful dress, but not, very ornate. It was like the perfect setting for this like beautiful beach wedding. And like I cried, it's very close to me, this friend. But we did have a minister who was a male, but like the setting, it was nature, it was beautiful, like the sun was there and the water and it was just beautiful. And so I think that kind of ceremony is a little more common. People, well, especially in California where I'm originally from, people do that a lot. You might have an experience like that. There was a point to that, but think about like what are the objects involved. So typically we think, okay, there's a ring, right? Probably an engagement ring, and then a wedding band. There's a wedding dress. There are probably flowers. There's usually like a location. What other objects? The bouquet. What's the thing the garter belt? Is that the right thing? The thing she wears on her thigh, traditionally. There's a cake. Usually there's like a wedding cake. It's a big thing. So these are things just off the top of my head. You're probably thinking of other things as well. But what about like the colors? So this is a good one. Traditionally in like Western culture, we would say like white wedding dress, but also like, what is the history behind this white wedding dress? And so obviously for the female, because the male he's not wearing white typically. I think in the 80s we saw a lot of like, like cream colored and white grooms, but not so much anymore. Okay, anyway, what was I going to say? A white wedding dress. What does this symbolize? Typically, like traditionally, historically, it has symbolized her purity, her virginity, which obviously when we talked about this in the previous discussion on sex, gender, and sexuality, this idea, and you guys talked about this in the group discussion about the value of how we value virginity in this culture, especially in females, like severely problematic. And, this was something, okay, so when I was rewatching the lecture that I was rewatching it before I was uploading it, and I was like, oh, I totally forgot to mention, so I'm glad I remember now. I want to mention this to you, that there was, you guys are probably familiar with this, some of you at least, that there are these, in some religious sects, there are like these purity balls where children, more 99% of the time, it's female children are basically pledging their virginity, like they're gonna wait till they're married, which like that in itself, if that's your personal decision, obviously like everyone has the right to their personal morality and ethics and how they decide to be in the world. Like obviously like that is your decision, whether you decide to wait till you're married, could absolutely be the right decision for you. Like that's not the problem. Getting back to this, so these children, often very young, like 10, 11, who this probably shouldn't even be part of their thought process yet, that they are pledging not to have sex with anyone until they're married, which I said in itself is not really the issue. But they are doing this like it's this like purity ball where they're pledging it to their fathers, like their father is somehow. I trying not to say the wrong thing here. We talked about this before about understanding like the idea of ethnocentrism and cultural relativism, that the ability to kind of step back and not have a bias in terms of like we see this really interesting, unique variety of cultural practices. So looking at this idea of a purity ball, like from as an anthropologist, from that anthropological perspective, I totally get why we see it. However, as an academic, it doesn't mean that we can't also critique it, want to understand it further, and this is what I want to get at. I'm not just like bashing this, obviously. Like I think it's really interesting in some ways, but I also think it's worthy of critique in some other ways. So this idea that these young girls are pledging their virginity to their father, I feel like there's something a little extreme in that sense. Like I said, though, anthropologically, I think it's very interesting. I think evolutionarily, like there's probably some explanatory, like, I think it's interesting. You know what? Let's make this an extra credit. Because some of you maybe haven't heard of this, so, and some of you maybe have. So let's say 5 points extra credit for giving me like like a small paragraph, like 4 to 5 sentences, just on what you like Google about it. Like try to make it from a reputable source. But just give me like, some facts about it and tell me what you think. Maybe give me your opinion on it. Like whatever you want to say. I just want to see you guys kind of investing, 10 minutes of your day into this. So the purity balls. So 5 points extra credit for that. Okay. But the whole point of that was I wanted to say is that going back to this idea that we overvalue, especially in females, virginity, absolutely true, definitely worthy of critique when we see that gendered stereotype. So, interesting. But, oh my gosh, we're only on slide 4 and I'm at like almost 30 minutes. Okay, I'm sorry guys. Okay, but, so this idea that there are these colors associated with, like virginity, we're definitely seeing a transition in that. And I'm getting so far ahead of myself. Skip ahead to slide 8. I should have rearranged this PowerPoint. So skip ahead to slide 8. You will see I have 3 examples of how that this white wedding dress, I think people are like, well, I get it traditionally. Maybe I want to wear white, maybe I don't, but I don't have to. And there are so many other beautiful ways, like if you choose to get married, of like how you decide like what color your dress is going to be. So in this slide, you'll see that there's black, which is absolutely gorgeous on her. Beautiful, like a dark green, and this very pretty, like feminine floral, like pink. So, I mean, you could pretty much pick any color and make a gorgeous wedding dress. So, even black, like the black is actually like, it's beautiful, very beautiful. And that's going to depend on like, so go back to slide 4. So that's going to depend on like, obviously what the style of the wedding, probably what time of the year you're getting married, what your favorite color is. Like, who cares anymore, Maybe you want that very traditional white wedding dress, as most people do, like if you decide to get married, but maybe you want to kind of make it your own. And so I think we are, like with it, probably like my generation and your generation, we're definitely seeing not necessarily like a full rejection of things like that are traditional, like marriage, but maybe you're like, okay, I want to get married, but I'm going to make it my own a little bit. We're going to shift it and change it. I want to, show my friends and family, my community, my commitment to this person, so I still want to get married. But these traditional things about valuing my virginity are absurd. So I'm going to wear a black wedding dress. I'm going to wear a green wedding dress. I'm going to wear a rainbow wedding, like whatever it is, So interesting. And then of course the events. So throwing the bouquet, the bride, she throws the bouquet, and then of course whoever catches the bouquet is the next person to get married. Cutting the cake, like all these things we can imagine. Giving the bride away. This is something very interesting historically, culturally. So this idea, most of you are probably familiar with this idea historically. Basically, this idea was that the father gave his daughter away to basically saying, my property, I'm now transferring this property, this woman, to another man. Like historically we know this is accurate. Now we could say, well, okay, that's kind of it, but it's still about love and romance. Like obviously no one's taking that experience away. But traditionally we know this really wasn't the case. And especially at a time when women didn't have often the ability to like get a job, get an education, that there's something a little like we can't always be nostalgic and reminiscent and over romanticize these things from the past, because that's not an accurate way of understanding them. Now we could say, okay, even super pessimistic, like absolutely that's what it was in the past, but now that's not the case. You could say, sure, it was that way in the past, but we've kind of, it's evolved in a sense, even in our own culture, that it's not really about that anymore. It's two people maybe coming together who are in love, who've made that decision to, make it official in terms of like people in their community and their friends and family to say like, I love this person and I want to have a ceremony celebrating our love. Absolutely. But you can still see why some people might say, well, that's true also, but I still don't really want to be a part of this historic practice that has traditionally like been used to oppress women in some way. And so like you see a lot of people kind of torn on this a lot. In like varying degrees, whether they want to get married, whether they don't want to get married at all, whether they do, but they want to make sure like the events or the ceremony is structured in a way that is not oppressive in any way. So often they might have like no one's walking the woman down the aisle, no one's giving her away. Maybe they don't even change their last name. So we're definitely seeing a shift in this like culturally, which I think is a positive thing. Okay, so go to slide 5. Like I said, I'm going to skim. I really don't want this to be a super long lecture. I can't believe how much I've been talking. I mean, I can't believe it. I absolutely believe it. Okay. Slide 5. Heteronormativity in marriage. So we are definitely in the last, like 20 years seeing this huge shift in this, that it's not only heterosexual people who can get married. Obviously, we know that that's not the case at all. And it's taken us a while it shouldn't even have to be something that the government is involved in. It has been, because as many of you know, when you get married, you are involving the government in your life, because you have to, get a marriage license. It's a whole thing, That definitely, I feel like, takes the romance out of it. Which is also, you'll see people who are like, we're married, but we're not. It's not recognized by, the government, because they're like, we don't need to involve the government in our personal love life, So some people do that as well. But if you want, like, I think, like, the government, like, benefits, like, certain tax benefits or whatever, of being able to be married, that you have to involve them. Anyway, but obviously we're seeing, same-sex marriage. For you guys, I'm assuming most of you being young, this is probably like, why are you even mentioning this? This is, of course. But for me, like, because I'm much older than you, this was a thing, like, this was not legal. And then it was, and it was like, God, why did we even have to fight for this? But okay, we did, and now it's here. That, like, I remember these events, So, and I remember people in my family being like, oh, that's gross, I was raised in a very religious family, so it's like, okay. Okay, so slide 6. If you want a feminist critique on marriage, there's this really great YouTube video I linked. I think it's Julie Bindel, who I adore. In fact, like, I probably put a bunch of her videos in here, but like, sorry, I'm skimming real quick. Okay. So go ahead and watch the video. It's like 5 minutes. I don't even think it's 5 minutes. So go ahead and watch that if you want to see like a more interesting, like, feminist critique on marriage. It's a really cool video to watch. But go ahead to slide 7. So, like, I've already kind of mentioned these, so new trends in marriage. So you might even have maybe you're thinking, well, I'm an atheist. I'm definitely not getting married in a church or by a minister. So you go down to the courthouse, and then it can be, still an official marriage recognized by the government, but it's done by, a judge. Or you have a friend go online and, get credentials to marry you, So you don't have to be married to, you don't have to be religious to be married, obviously. And then here, so I kind of mentioned this already, females not changing their last name is absolutely a trend. Either hyphenating, maybe not changing their name at all, or even combining. So I have a friend who, this is very interesting, they got married over 10 years ago, but she and her husband were like, we don't really want to do the hyphenating thing. She didn't want to change her name. And so he was like, well, why don't we just both take a part of our last names and combine them, and we each have a new last name. And so that's what they did. They took like the first 3 letters of her last name and like the part of his last name, I forget if it was the beginning or the end, and they combined it to a completely new name. And so they both, male and female, they both have like a maiden name, and they both have their married names. So it's very interesting. Very interesting. But like I've heard a couple instances of this happening. So that's actually, I think that's like a really cool idea, that you are making your new family, and it's not about being kind of like one, like it's not, I know like it's very symbolic, but when you take someone's name, you're like kind of being, now you're in their family, and it's not about a hyphenate. It's like you've created your own new name family. Like I like that idea. But also, like I said, you know, some people choose to hyphenate, males and females, like husband and wife. And then of course, if you're a same-sex couple, sometimes like this makes even more sense, because there isn't that traditional like pressure or standard to like one of you to switch names. Maybe you still, but some people are like, I love, like my friend, the one I was telling you about, how at the beach wedding, like she had, like she's not very close with her family, and so her last name is not, she doesn't feel any strong ties to it, and she really loves the family she married into, and so she's like, I want to take that name. She's like, that last name means more to me emotionally than my own maiden last name ever really meant to me, because it's tied to these people who I'm not really close to. So like I totally get that. Okay, so go to slide 8. So we already talked about those, beautiful wedding. And then slide 9, another example. So another friend, this was last year, 2 of my really close friends got married, and he's in a biker club. And so they had this really, like there were so many more pictures, but I don't want to bombard this PowerPoint with a bunch of pictures. You can kind of see the pictures. So she has this traditional white wedding dress, but then she's got, you know, her leather cut on over that, and they had like just married, and like the cans on the back of the bike, and like it was just like, it was very cute, a very cute thing. Traditional, but also different. I love this. I love when people make things their own, you know. Okay, so go to slide 10. What do we got? 37 minutes. Okay. Some more important aspects to marriage and family. Obviously, traditionally, when we're thinking about it, we think of things like there's a permanence to that relationship. There's a permanence, like even in the vows. So you say like till death. You don't say till you're tired of that person, or, you know. And obviously we know, so like the divorce rate in this country for first marriages is something like 38%. Once you get like second marriages, it goes up to like 55% or something, and then like third marriages like 75%. So you might hear the divorce rate in this country is like 50, but it's not, like that's an average. Statistically, that's not really accurate, but it is like 38% or something. So that's still, it's high. And I think there are positives and negatives to that. I hear a lot of people say, well, it's because people don't know how to commit anymore, and people don't know how to stick it through the hard times. That might be true to some degree, but I think also what we're seeing, I think more so, is traditionally when we think of like married couples, it was a male and a female, and traditionally the female was a housewife who didn't have an education, who didn't have the options to leave and still be able to support herself if she wasn't happy, if she wasn't in love anymore, if she was being abused. So I think that we often do, we over romanticize the past, and we're not willing to like look at it for what it really was. So I think that this 38%, I think, still shows that like 2/3 of first marriages do work, and people are willing to commit. And I think that other than like a third of it is showing that we have moved it on as a culture to say, if you're not happy, you have the right to leave, whether you're a male or a female. But especially if you're a female, historically you maybe didn't have the option. Now you do. You probably have your own job, your own income, you have resources if someone is, you know, abusing you in some way. So you absolutely can leave that. You're not stuck in that. So I think even when we think 38%, I think that still shows that 2/3 of the time people are willing to work through the hard times. And I think the other third is, you know, sometimes there are deal breakers, and you shouldn't have to stay, male or female, you shouldn't have to stay in a relationship where you're being abused, or whether you're not happy maybe you've grown apart, so anyway. But also we have these in our vows. Like you don't anticipate when you're marrying someone that it's gonna end badly. You think I love this person. I'm gonna be with him forever. And so we see that in the vows people take with each other. And then of course there's assumption. There's a common residence. You're living together. So these are the things. Slide 11. Other functions. Obviously it creates more stability in terms of like romantic relationships, communally, like in a community. Stability in terms of like reproducing, like having children and family, having a family unit with children. Tends to regulate the sexual division of labor, which we had talked about before. Traditionally, we would see, like, if we're talking about even just like 50 years ago, that we typically would see the male who's the one with the income, the female is the one taking care of the home, and we absolutely still see that now. Like, that might be the option you choose to stay at home, male or female. To one of you decides to work, the other one is going to stay home with the children if you decide to have children. But often we see both people working, and whether you have children or not, we definitely still see, I think, both of you probably have a similar level of education. And there's actually a lot of studies on this. Like, typically when you're married, you have a similar, like, both of you will have a master's, or both of you have a bachelor's, or both of you like went to trade school. You're more likely to marry someone with who's similar to you in those aspects, like, which is no surprise to you, or shouldn't be, at least. Okay. And also another function of marriage is that it creates high parental investment, especially from males, because we talked about this, like, as humans, as primates, that this isn't always the case, and so there has to be other ways where the male is more likely to invest in the offspring. And so this creates this unit of, the family unit. Everyone's investing in this unit, in the sense of community, the sense of family, whether we're talking about it from an evolutionary or cultural perspective, that creates for both parents to be able to invest more. Okay, so slide. I'm going kind of fast because I really want to get through some of this and I don't want to forget anything. Okay, so mate selection. So we've talked before about like sexual selection and who you might choose and why. But what about who you shouldn't? Like, who's off limits? Who should you not? And there are a couple of different models. There is some overlap in these models, but I just want to kind of go over these with you. So what are the reasons why you might not choose someone, like, evolutionarily, culturally? Okay, so slide 13, natural aversion theory. So basically this is the idea that there's something psychological going on, something called sexual imprinting. Basically, when you are born, the people who are around you, it's assumed those are not potential mates for you, because evolutionarily this makes sense, because those are people who you're related to, mother, father, brother, sister, grandparents. That anyone you see in those first few years of life, you have an imprint of, like, it's like psychologically, it's like not a potential mate, not a potential mate, not a potential mate, and so you carry that with you through your life, and so it's just like a psychological mechanism. However, imagine you're in a scenario where you're around a lot of people in early life that you're not blood related to. You'll, like, the idea, this model basically says that you will still imprint on them like not a potential mate. So let's say you're around someone who's like an adopted brother or sister, or maybe you're raised with your cousins, or maybe you're raised in an orphanage or something, and the people around you, you still will psychologically imprint like not a potential mate, because evolutionarily what would have been the case 99% of the time, people who you were around in those first few years of life would not have been potential mates. But then, like, getting into like, well, what are the reasons why? So go to slide 14, inbreeding. So I'm going to pull out my pins for this one. Why would it be that you shouldn't mate with your, like, evolutionarily, genetically, why would it be that you shouldn't mate with your brothers or your sisters or your parents? Because, like, culturally we would say, oh my god, that's gross. But why do we say that? Like, there's an evolutionary reason for everything. So why would we say that's gross? Why would we think having a sexual relationship or romantic relationship with your brother or sister or parent is gross? Like, we feel that. I feel like we feel it. Like, we're like, oh, like, it's just like a gut feeling. You can't explain. You just know it's wrong. And we would say it's probably morally wrong. But for every cultural rule or cultural taboo we have, it's often rooted in something evolutionary. So recall when we talked about Punnett squares very briefly. I'm going to draw a Punnett square. So gets back to this idea. So imagine there's something recessive, a recessive condition that's running in your family, and someone else in your family is more likely to have that same recessive genetic condition than a perfect stranger. So imagine what's happening. I'm going to draw a Punnett square. Ooh, this is a bad one. And so remember, this is a square. Remember the Punnett square. So let's say you're heterozygous for something. Okay. And someone else in your family is also heterozygous. So you may not be exuding that particular, you don't have that phenotype, but it's still in your genetics. So now you've got two people who are heterozygous, and then the potential for your offspring to have it is now, like if it's a recessive condition, let's say, is now like that's there. But imagine you were just mating with someone like, a stranger that you met, which is typically how people do it. They don't marry within their family. That maybe you're heterozygous for something, and then that person is like homozygous dominant. So now there's like 0 chance of you having offspring with that. So like imagine there's a scenario where people are like, there's variation, because that's how we always start out when talking about evolution. There's variation. Some people are marrying or having sexual romantic relationships with people in their close family unit, and others are not. If there are recessive conditions, which there often are all the time in people and lineages, that offspring you're having are dying, are not surviving, are having horrible medical conditions, like just in terms of natural selection, what's going to happen. But also in terms of like culturally, why we have these taboos. You might say, look, we've noticed every time so-and-so marries her sister, their kids get sick. Maybe we should just like have a cultural rule that we don't do that. And then that cultural rule is then taken to suddenly we have all these taboos against it. So there's often a reason for that. Okay. And then slide 15. So go to slide 15, family disruption. So this is just another way of looking at it more like some evolutionary reasons, but also like the cultural reasons that it just creates disharmony within the family unit, within the community, because with romance, with sexual relationships often comes, not always, and not in healthy relationships, but can create things like jealousy, competition, especially when you take into these other like peripheral factors, like do you guys have a lot of resources? Do you not? Like how is that affecting all of these, different scenarios? So it can be problematic for multiple reasons why you should not choose those people as mates. Okay, so slide 16. Also, like depending on the culture, there might be other specific rules about who you can pick, who you can't pick. And I have some words here, and I have a chart on the next slide. Exogamy, endogamy, and then arranged marriages. So go to slide 17. You'll see exogamy. So this is a rule requiring marriage outside of one's own social or kinship group. So you might have to go outside your community. It might not be allowed. Even if they're not related to you, you have to go completely outside of your community to find a mate. Or it could be endogamy, where it's required that you marry someone within your own community. So we can see this in Western culture and other cultures where it's more widespread. But also think about this also in terms of like Western culture, how we have this in maybe like if you're a certain religion that you have to marry within your own religion. They have to be the same, maybe you have to know them from church, or maybe they have to at least be the same religion as you, or they have to convert if you want to marry them. So we definitely see that. And then let's see, go to slide 18, arranged marriages. So we see this obviously in many cultures, but also like there's this interesting thing. I don't know if this show's still on, so I have the pic. Oh my god, hiccups, snotty nose, burping this whole lecture. I'm sorry guys. Okay. The show was on TLC. It's called Married by Mom and Dad, and I caught a couple episodes of it. I don't know if it's still on anymore. I caught a couple episodes years ago. But basically in this show, these people are like, look, I've had some shitty luck in dating. I'm going to let my mom and dad pick a potential husband or wife for me because I'm not doing a good job. They know me really well. I'm gonna let them pick. If I'm remembering correctly, I think this show went like they picked like 3 potential people, and then they did these interviews, and then they picked someone for them, and then that person like married that person, like, and then like it's a TV show, so who knows how like real it really was. But like it was interesting to see these scenarios of like the parents going into detail, like my daughter deserves this or my son deserves this, or we want someone who has these qualities, obviously things like, being a kind person and a supportive partner. But some of them you see, like, it's not as if every parent was without their own flaws, because some were like, no, they need to make this amount of money. And it's like, well, okay, so interesting show. But to see how when you have someone else kind of who knows you well, but can make more of an objective decision about that, who's the best possible partner for you. Maybe it's a good option for you, maybe it's not, it's just interesting. So, okay, so slide 19, number of spouses. We talked a little bit about this before in terms of like relationships, when we talked about sex, gender, and sexuality, about like open relationships versus monogamy. So here we have a couple of examples. Monogamy, you guys obviously know what that is. But also polygyny, so that's one male, multiple females, or polyandry, which is one female, multiple males. So we see both of those in humans, and we see both of them in other primates as well. Humans, it's a little more rare to see polyandry, although we absolutely do. So if you go to slide 20, just some details about monogamy, which you guys are assuming understand. So 2 people, you're not seeing anyone else. You haven't agreed to it, or you're not cheating, like that's monogamy, you're with that person. And then go slide 21. So this is just a repeat of some of the stuff I talked about before about looking at humans as primates, being sexually dimorphic, that monogamy doesn't come natural to us, and I want to make sure because I'm not sure I was clear on this point when I made this before in the previous lecture, that it's not natural to us. That doesn't mean, but it's not completely unnatural also. We're really good at serial monogamy, but also there's going to be variation in individuals. You might marry your high school sweetheart and be with them and be in love your whole life. And like, I wish that happened to everyone. Like, everyone wants a great love story. But that's probably not the case for most people. And like I said, I want to make sure I was clear on this, that it doesn't, just because it's not natural, that explains why so many people have a problem with it. But it's not completely unnatural to us that we can't do it. And I think while we might have like a cultural standard, like, oh, we should be striving for this, only one person your whole life, that's not realistic. I think there's absolutely something amazing and beautiful about wanting that, or wanting to be with just one person. I think that there's, that's my opinion on that. You might not agree, but I think, like, I don't want to take away from being the pessimist all the time, be like, it's just an evolutionary trick. You can still strive for these beautiful things in your life, Okay. Slide 22. Polygyny. So you guys are probably a little more aware of this, especially living in Vegas. And there was a show called Sister Wives. There's a few shows I think similar to this, but I have a clip here. You just go to that YouTube video. It's like 5 minutes long and just kind of covers a little bit about this. And in class, we would discuss the video clip, looking at the pros and cons of being in a in a family unit like this. What are the religious implications? What are like the pros and cons of this? We can't really have that discussion in class, but I will say, when I've talked about this in previous classes, it seems as if overwhelmingly people say, I don't agree, but like that's their choice. And then you hear a few other people who say, I don't think that's really accurate, because I think a lot of times there's a religious pressure to do something like this. Like maybe that's accurate. And then I've heard some very like other extreme views. I had one student one time say, well, the first marriage is legitimate, but the other women who are involved in that are all prostitutes, or they're all his mistresses. And it's like, that's not how they view it. That's absolutely not how they view it. So I get that everyone's going to have a very, we're going to see a wide variety of opinions on that, maybe based on your personal experience or not. But anyway, like I said, watch that video and just a little more understanding of that. And always, keeping in mind these ideas of cultural relativism, that you might not agree, but look at it for the facts of the matter, understand like the process, try to pick apart like why they might be doing it for personal or religious reasons, cultural reasons. And then slide 23, polyandry, another, like, it's like a 4-minute clip. Watch this, talking about when and why we might see polyandry in human populations, because when you look at it evolutionarily, you'd say, well, polygyny kind of makes sense because if you're thinking in terms of like having more offspring, it makes more sense that a man might have multiple wives or multiple partners because then he could have more offspring more quickly. Evolutionarily, the other way doesn't really make quite as much sense, but it does. And the video gets into this a little bit about why you might see this, and this is interesting. Okay, go to slide 24. Open marriages, a repeat of what we talked about before, being in an open relationship or open marriage. Polyamory, how we're seeing culturally how this is shifting. Like, it's definitely not something that's as uncommon anymore. Obviously, it's not for everyone, but for those people who do decide to do that, there are some more options for you in terms of like social media and stuff. So it's not it's not, I think, the taboo that it used to be, although it still is a little bit. But I think we live in a city where when we hear stuff like this, like nothing surprises us. We're like, oh, okay, you know. Okay. We're reaching the hour mark. Okay. Didn't want it to. Well, I did spend like 12 minutes talking about other stuff. So, okay. 25. Go to slide 25. Marriage resident patterns. Like this. This meme here is hilarious. But looking at, depending on the culture, where you're expected to live or not live, are you expected to live close to the husband's family, close to the wife's family? Are you supposed to go to a new location? Like in Western culture, we often don't really see this being like a hardcore rule, although depending on what subculture you are in, this might be something that's a little more traditional, like you always live near the husband's mother or something like that. So like I said before, if we were in class, we'd be able to talk about that a little bit more. But there are cross-culturally, there are going to be different rules to that. Go to slide 26. Who are kin? So we talked about this before, who is family, but also we also have other, even in Western culture, ways of understanding this. So typically we think of like their biological, you have number one, biological family, like those people who you are related to by blood, siblings or your parents. But also by marriage. So you might have, like, maybe your mom's sister married a man and that's your uncle. Like, you understand, like, I'm blood related to that person and that person, but we still say aunt and uncle because, But in other cultures, there might be very specific title designations based on whether someone's related to you by marriage or related to you by blood. And in Western culture, we don't really have that. And in fact, we often expand the term, like, aunt and uncle or auntie, like, I'm auntie. Like... So one, I told you before that I call them my nieces, even though they're technically my second cousins, because I feel like my cousin's more like my sister. So I'm Auntie Alicia to them. I love that, But also to my friend Mark, his dog, Mufasa, like, I'm Auntie Alicia, like, Auntie's coming over. And I say to my girls, like, uncle, like, and when they like, if I say grandma to them, they know who that is. When I say uncle, they know who that is, So I'm like, uncle's coming over, So, like, even extending to non-humans, we use those terms. But we definitely use them in terms of, like, even humans. You might have someone who's really, like, a family friend who's known your family for forever that you call Uncle so-and-so or Aunt so-and-so. Or just like me, you might have people who are technically maybe, like, a third cousin, but you call them auntie or something. So, and then, of course, cross-culturally, there are going to be other terms that we use for that. Okay, slide 27. This kind of just repeats what I said, that typically we have different terms for whether you're male or female, even if you're in that same, like, kind of position in terms of, like, the family structure, that we would say, like, mother, father, aunt, uncle. Cousin, we say cousin in Western culture, but in other cultures that might not be the case. There might be a very specific term for, like, a male cousin or a female cousin or a blood related cousin versus married, one related to you by marriage. So it depends. And then of course, if we get into, like, things like step parents or stepchildren, we have all these terms that mean so many interesting different things, and we understand what they mean. I think most of us would say, yeah, family's family, though, whether you're step or half or someone I'm not even actually related to. Like, I think most of us get that, but it's interesting to see, like, from an anthropological perspective, the cross-cultural differences, and just humans love to organize. We love to organize and categorize things, so we're doing this all the time. Okay, slide 28. Okay. I think I kind of already said that, like, just the different designations for who's an uncle, how do you define that? And sometimes in different cultures, it might even be whether if it's your father's sister or brother, father's mother's sister, but like there's all these different terms. So for us, we would just say like great aunt, great uncle, like it's more of a broad term. But imagine if you had to remember like all those different, you know, relationships, because each of them has a very specific title. So very interesting there as well. Slide 29. Oh, just hit the hour mark. Okay, we're wrapping it up. Okay, descent groups. So did we do pedigree charts in this class? No, I do that with the lab. Okay, no, we didn't. I don't think we talked about these, but you guys have probably seen these. Sometimes I give the 101 an assignment to do this, but we didn't because it's remote, so it's a little more difficult. Looking at understanding like your pedigree chart. Oh, and then like I was telling you guys when I did 23andMe, that it gives you like, for anyone else who's done it, it's like, oh, we see someone else is on your family tree, and it gives you like your family tree. I'm like, oh yeah, oh that's all okay, cool. You know, very interesting. And then it'll also tell you like so and so is probably related to you. That, you know, they share 3% of your DNA. They're probably a 6th cousin. I'm like, I have never heard of that person. Oh, to make this video even longer, I'm sure some of you have heard of these stories where people have like done 23andMe or like, you know, Ancestry.com, and then they find like a secret relative, or they find out they were adopted or something. I had a friend, this happened to her. She found out that she had like sisters she never knew about, and there's like a whole story. It's not as sinister as you think, or you know, but it was just, she was like, oh my god, I've always wanted a sister, you know. So it was really cool. And then I had one friend who found out that their grandfather wasn't their grandfather. So that person had passed, so it was like they didn't need to tell them, but it was like, oh my gosh, you know. Well, I did. I was like, where's the secret family? I had nothing, you know. So I was like, oh, okay, maybe it'll happen, but you know. Okay. So last slide 30. So paternity certainty. I think I talked about this with you guys before when we talked about sexual selection, but this idea, like when a female gives birth, there's no question if that's her offspring, right? But for the male, there's always the question, even if it's just a little bit. So we have all these different ways, like men, these counter strategies of like men trying to make sure, so we call it mate guarding or monogamy, that they're around more often, so they can be pretty sure that, you know, it's that offspring is theirs. Now, so I talked about this before, about looking at things in terms of like the bell curve. Like when we're looking at things in nature, we often see things are distributed on this curve. So imagine we're looking at a graph, and you know, things are going to be distributed. Most people are going to be here in this average, you know, experience, whether we're talking about like a certain behavior or whatever, that they're going to be in this average way. So we would say, evolutionarily, looking at this idea of paternity certainty, this is where we see things culturally, like, you know, monogamy, being in a healthy relationship, being in, maybe marrying that person, that's a way to kind of, while we're not thinking of it, that's a way to kind of ensure that those offspring are yours. But it's in a very healthy, positive way. And then you're going to see people at these extremes where we see extreme jealousy, abusive behavior. So I want to make sure I'm clear on this, that when I'm talking about paternity certainty and saying often what we see is males like mate guarding, that means these very acceptable, because also we can look at these things in terms of like critiquing them. Like I said before, we can explain something evolutionarily. That doesn't mean we're excusing the behaviors, especially when we're talking about something like this. So we might say, okay, mate guarding is having a healthy, loving marriage, right? But we're going to see those things at the extreme, and those things obviously would be completely unacceptable. Even if we can explain them evolutionarily, looking at statistics, it doesn't excuse that behavior in any way. But most of you are probably familiar. Sometimes females will have this behavior as well, but typically we see it more in males having this behavior of extreme jealousy and because of this idea of paternity certainty, even if they have offspring or not. Okay, so there's a lot of other things I feel like I skipped over that I wanted to say, but I could tell this was going to be a longer lecture than I really wanted it to be, but I didn't want to make it 2 videos. I'm sure you guys didn't want that either. Okay, so we're at a little more than an hour, but I'll cut it off here, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Good luck with your papers.